Party of 242. It means no woman will be prosecuted for ending their own pregnancy at any stage. LBC political correspondent Aggie Chambray says there were two key amendments proposed to the Crime and Policing Bill. The first, put forward by Labour's Tonia Antoniazzi, has passed the Commons.
It was called NC1, and it means women will no longer be prosecuted even for abortions after 24 weeks and even for abortions performed without medical professionals. The second amendment that was put forward by Stella Creasy, which now will not be voted on, was this would enshrine abortion access as a human right and aim to protect women who've terminated their own pregnancies from being investigated.
Donald Trump says the US knows where Iran's supreme leader is, but won't kill him for now as tensions ramp up in its conflict with Israel. Iran's ambassador to the UK insists his country has no desire to produce a nuclear bomb, despite Israeli claims. The US VP, J.D. Vance, has warned Mr. Trump may decide to get involved. The president is currently meeting with national security advisors in the White House Situation Room. But Sir Keir Starmer, who's in Canada with G7 leaders, doesn't believe Washington will join Israeli attacks on Iran.
We had a 2-hour discussion with the President on the Middle East on this very issue. As a result of that, the G7 statement came out very clear about the risk of the nuclear programme in Iran, Israel's right to self-defence and the need to de-escalate.
Meanwhile, Gaza's health ministry says at least 59 Palestinians have been killed and more than 200 wounded while waiting for aid trucks to enter the strip. Witnesses claim Israeli forces carried out an airstrike on a nearby home before opening fire towards the crowd in Khan Yunis. Israel says its military had spotted a gathering close to where its forces were operating and is investigating. A man's been jailed for at least 39 years for murdering his partner and a neighbour on Christmas Day. Jaswell Brown carried out what's been called a cocaine-fueled and frenzied attack in Milton Keynes. He also tried to kill his 18-year-old son. And yellow heat warnings have been issued for most of England. Temperatures are set to reach highs of 33 degrees this weekend. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 41 points at 88.34. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.17. LBC weather largely dry and clear tonight. A few showers for northwestern Scotland and the Northern Isles, a low of 4 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm James Kitchen.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. This is Cross Question.
It's Simon Marks in for Ian Dale all of this week, and delighted to be in the chair for this evening's edition of Cross Question. We do this on Ian's programme every Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, an hour of open-ended conversation where you get to set the agenda. Whatever is on your mind, we will discuss in the hour ahead. And joining me tonight around the Cross Question table, Praful Nargund, Labour councillor in Islington and director of the Good Growth Foundation think tank, Claire Hanna, the leader of the SDLP and Member of Parliament for Belfast South and Mid Down, political commentator Kirsty Buchanan, a former advisor to former Prime Minister Theresa May, and we are going to be joined, we hope, by Sir John Hayes, the Conservative Member of Parliament for South Holland and the Deepings. You can ask them anything you like. Perhaps you've got questions about a possible escalation of the conflict between Israel and Iran and what that might mean for all of us here in the UK. About tonight's vote in the Commons about decriminalising the UK's abortion laws. Perhaps you want to ask about Friday's upcoming vote on assisted dying in Parliament, or maybe you are still reeling from the Home Secretary's revelations yesterday about grooming gangs. You can ask about anything that is on your mind this evening on Cross Question. It is your question that sets the agenda, and if you don't just want to listen to us but watch us too, you can in full high definition right now on the LBC app.
Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app. This is LBC.
And let's go to our first question of the evening. It comes by telephone from Sean, who is in Preston tonight. Good evening, Sean. What would you like to ask the panel?
Yeah, hello, everyone. Is Donald Trump a genuine peacemaker, or is he just after a glittering prize?
The glittering prize, Sean, presumably being one of the Nobel variety. Is that what you're thinking?
That's what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Let's find out what the panel think. Praful Nargund, is Donald Trump a genuine peacemaker, or is he just chasing the dream of that glittering Nobel Peace Prize?
I'm not quite sure what dream he's chasing. He's increasingly erratic. In the case of the escalating conflict in Iran, I think he's following events rather than leading them. And I don't know if you've seen his, I don't know what you'd call them, posts tonight on Truth Social. Increasingly, erratic and uncontrolled. I don't think his bluster is going to contribute to peacemaking anywhere. It isn't working in the conflict that's emerged with Iran and Israel. It hasn't worked with Ukraine and with Russia. And frankly, also all of his measures on trade just cause chaos. They haven't improved anyone's lives.
But were he to engineer, in conjunction with Benjamin Netanyahu, regime change in Iran and a new series of relationships in government in Iran, I mean, there are circumstances under which that could work out.
I mean, that's a very hypothetical, and I think there is good reason why the British government is calling for de-escalation. And I think, the context of history, just recent history, is that attempts at regime change through a barrel have tended not to succeed on their own terms and actually escalated conflicts, turned into quagmires, and you have a cycle of violence that follows. So if anything, I think we are heading towards more instability. And one of the things that we found in recent research we've done is that the British public really doesn't trust Donald Trump. They think he is unreliable. They think he is not a good ally for us. And while we need to have a good relationship with the States, see the trade deal that's just been struck, they think that actually he's not someone we can have a decent relationship with because you can't trust the paper any deal that you make with him is written on.
So John Hayes, Conservative MP for South Holland and the Deepings, your view on Donald Trump, genuine peacemaker or just going after the Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, our relationship with America is more important than any single president or indeed any single prime minister. It pervades all kinds of political change, doesn't it? It's a critical relationship for us. Certainly in terms of defence and security, it's a fundamental relationship. And I guess presidents have come and gone, and relationship between presidents and the leadership here have waxed and waned. Some have been very strong. The Reagan-Thatcher relationship, for example, was strong. The Bush-Blair relationship was strong. Others more doubtful. We were never quite sure what President Biden thought of Britain. Anything he said about it was lukewarm, if I can put it that way. So we have to maintain good relations with America in our national interest.
Claire, Hanna, your view on where this is all going and what Donald Trump's motivations are?
Yeah, it's terrifying, and I suppose it's exactly what most of us worried about when the US elected and re-elected somebody who has a history of being delusional and a narcissist and with no obvious moral or foreign policy framework. So it's very worrying, and so clearly able to see, I mean, the Middle East, among many other things, has a history of conflict spiralling quite quickly, atrocity leading to atrocity and grievance leading to grievance, and obviously innocent people die in scenarios like that. He has gone from, I want to be a Nobel Peace Prize winner, to I'm going to evacuate a city bigger than New York, via a tweet. We're not dealing with somebody in any way irrational. So de-escalation is the name of the game.
Well, but he made that suggestion, that call for Tehran to be evacuated, hours after grudgingly signing on to a G7 declaration that called for de-escalation. I mean, you don't evacuate a city to de-escalate.
Exactly. We're dealing with somebody with absolutely no consistency and all of the things we know about, the last bit of advice that dropped into his ear, and probably more guided by social media likes than, as I say, by the lives of millions of innocent people who are, and we can't take our eyes off Gaza, who are obviously still being starved and bombed and living in hellish conditions, but millions of people across in Iran and indeed in Israel who are living in fear in their homes about what this lunatic is going to pronounce next about their lives.
Kirsty Buchanan.
Well, that Nobel Peace Prize seems to be getting further and further away, doesn't it? If I might strike an uncharacteristically optimistic note at the moment. Look, I mean, I slightly agree with the former Foreign Secretary William Hague on this. This is not the position that any of us would want to find ourselves in at this stage of the game. But if you are going to go into Iran, finish the job. And the reality is that there is only one ability for Israel to finish the job and to downgrade the enriched uranium, which is almost at weapons grade. And all G7 countries agree that Iran cannot be allowed to have nuclear weapons. So if we are all in agreement about that, there is only one way to get into those nuclear facilities that are buried deep into the ground, and that's with American bunker buster bombs, which they hit the ground, they first explode the ground and then they bury further in, and there's a secondary explosion. They are massive, massive pieces of kit. America is the only place that has them. I suspect that's why we're going in. And if I can just try and even more, I'm not being Pollyanna-ish about this, but there is a world where regime change isn't the issue here. What you're trying to get is a capitulation out of Iran, which has played for time, much the same as Putin has played for time, whilst getting what it wants out of a negotiating strategy. And this is the regime that has also funded Hamas, Hezbollah, and exported terror, including to the Ukraine with its Shahid drones, the world over.
And there's nobody here defending Iran, but you can't airstrike your way to peace and security. There's no scenario where any of this improves Israel's security, if that's what Trump is implying is the aim.
In the years and months where we have tried to negotiate and have a negotiated settlement with Iran, it has moved to enriched uranium, which is within a spitting distance of being able to supply 9 nuclear weapons to Iran. Nobody wants to see that.
But Kirsty, let me put to you what another one of our listeners has asked as a follow-up question for the panel. This is from Robbie in Chelmsford, who asks, doesn't threatening Iran make it more dangerous and more likely that they'll try to obtain a nuclear weapon?
Well, the answer to that is they are trying to, gain a nuclear weapon in the first place.
That put them under control in the first place.
5% enriched uranium to be able to use it as an energy source. Their enriched uranium is at 60%. They don't want it to hit their net zero targets. They want it to be able to make nuclear weapons, 9 nuclear weapons. For the first time in 80 years, the International Atomic Energy Agency has said that they're in breach of their conditions. This is arguably the most dangerous country in the world. It is a global exporter of terror, not just to Israel, but the world over. And it has to be stopped. We wouldn't want to be where we are, but if we are, let's get the job finished and get it done by downgrading those weapons, making sure that they don't have the ballistic missile capability to hit back, and making sure that they don't have those surface-to-air missiles too.
Praful Nargund.
Well, I mean, look, you mentioned William Hague, and he was obviously part of making an agreement that brought control to Iran's attempts to get nuclear weapons. And you are absolutely right that they are, they cannot be allowed to get nuclear weapons. They are a threat to global security. Diplomacy is the long-term route to solve that problem. Trump is part of that problem. He pulled out of the agreement in the first place in his first term. So, getting back to that kind of approach is how we might actually save lives, de-escalate and get a long-term solution. What stops a successor regime, even if you do, wipe out the capabilities that exist right now, trying again? You do ultimately have to have a long-term solution, and this is very much a short-term one.
So, John Hayes, I mean, there is a sense in which it appears that Donald Trump is making this policy up on the hoof.
Yeah, one never knows how much that's true or not. I mean, he will have a team of advisors around him. He'll have very bright people on security and intelligence around him. America's a very advanced country in those terms. So I think the impression perhaps he likes to create is perhaps slightly different to the reality that's going on in America. He certainly trades, doesn't he, on the basis of being kind of both irascible and unpredictable. And indeed his unpredictability, in a way, was part of his appeal electorally. So I wouldn't want to estimate what discussions are going on behind the scenes in America, but I do think we have to assume that some of it is his branding and how he likes to present himself, both to the American public and the world.
Claire Hanna, do you agree with Robbie in Chelmsford that just poking the stick at Iran makes it more dangerous and more likely they'll try to obtain a nuclear weapon?
Well, there's a difference between negotiation and diplomacy and poking a stick and firing out mad tweets. And I think we're gone far past the stage where, Trump is just doing madman theory and he's trying to keep people guessing. I don't think there is a strategy. So I just, as I say, we've seen too many times in that region. And I think comparisons between Northern Ireland and the Middle East are always foolish and synthetic. But I do come from a place that knows a thing or two do about atrocity leading to atrocity, and just how things can just get out of your control whenever you don't proceed very, very carefully. And he's exactly the wrong person to do that. And the UK must proceed with extreme caution. And I appreciate that there's a game to be played and a line to be walked about keeping in his good graces, but certainly not following him down to these very, very dangerous places.
OK, and we are keeping an eye on that Situation Room, which, of course, we can't see into at the White House. And if we get more news from there while Cross Question remains on air, we will bring it to you. Lots more of your questions to come. Don't forget, you can call them in at 0345 6060 973, same number for WhatsApp. You can text them to 84850, or you can even ask Alexa to send a comment to LBC, and your question will be asked here on the air. The time now is 16 minutes past 8.
Donald Trump says the US knows where Iran's supreme leader is, but won't kill him for now. The president's meeting his national security advisors as the
LB.
Energy.
Cross Question on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Or you can text 84850 with your question, which is what Jeff in Woking has done. And Jeff asks, is it a good idea for the government to hold a national inquiry into grooming gangs, or should this be a matter left to the police to investigate? Praful Nargund.
I think it is a good idea. That there is a national inquiry. Baroness Casey, she's independent, she's not party political, she's looked at the evidence and think there is a case for it, especially for compelling people to give evidence. I mean, this is a national scandal. The victims can't be forgotten. What they experienced is absolutely horrific. And I think it is important that it has been highlighted, the need for the collection of data on ethnicity and nationality. We collect this in so many other areas of life precisely because it helps to give better information to make decisions and solve problems. So why on earth wasn't it being collected here? That is an even bigger part of reinforcing how big a scandal this is.
Have you changed your mind over this national inquiry?
No, I actually...
the Prime Minister
no, I publicly said that there needs to be an inquiry on the table a while ago.
You've been consistent
all the way through.
I've been consistent
on this, yeah.
So, John Hayes, is this a good idea, this new national inquiry?
I called for it in January. Along with many others. I wrote about it in the national press, my local press, and I called for it in Parliament. It was always necessary to have a national inquiry to get to the bottom of this, because it was a monumental failure on the part of local authorities and the police. And I totally agree with my co-panellists about the need to collect ethnicity details, which is what Louise Casey's called for. And the reason for that is, it's as plain as the nose on your face. This was largely about men of Pakistani origin abusing girls that were principally white. There was an ethnic aspect. It's not the whole.
But if it's as plain as the nose on your face as you suggest, why do we now need to collect Why was it a mistake not to collect ethnicity data in the first place?
Well, mistake because there was an assumption on the part of the authorities, to some degree born of a fear of being called racists, that somehow if they made it more woolly, if they didn't collect that data, they didn't come to the conclusion, which I said was very plain, that it will be lost and there will be no offence caused, the community relations we maintain, all of those things. Maybe perfectly laudable ambitions in general terms. What it led to was what amounts to a cover-up, really. And, you know, I was never satisfied with that, and I've said so many times. So there's an issue here about particular cultural assumptions. The first person to make me aware of that in graphic terms was Sajid Javid, the former Home Secretary. Of course, his own family came from Pakistan. He said there's an ethnic aspect to this that needs to be explored.
When you say there was a cover-up that was taking place during your party's numerous years in government.
Well, it was taking place locally. So if you look at the people who have responsibility in the localities around children's safety, around children's services, that was local authorities. Police, of course, had local responsibility for dealing with crimes. Sometimes the girls involved were vilified. They were characterised in a particular way. Because they were girls from difficult backgrounds or they came from children's homes and so on, and they were preyed upon. So the cover-up, in a sense, was the unwillingness to take this seriously. And it was always serious, and we now know how serious. And I'm going to say one other thing. Who's to know what's still going on? Who's to know?
And you were saying during the break that you'd had some sort of early stage experiences in trying to combat this. Tell us more about what that was all about.
I want the other panellists to have their turn, as I'm sure you do, but I'll just say this. I commissioned a piece of independent work under the chairmanship of a chap called Professor Mohammed Abdul Haq. He brought together a panel. It wasn't political. They were drawn from the licensed taxi trade. They were drawn from the charity sector. Susie Lamplugh Trust were involved. A couple of Labour MPs were on that as well, the late Frank Field and so on, looking at taxi licensing. Because what Louise Casey's also found in her report is a close tie to the taxi trade. Because taxi drivers know each other. They can communicate easily. They have mobility by definition. And a lot of this abuse could take place in their vehicles, or the vehicle could take the victims to where they were abused. So I did that work, made a series of recommendations about improving safety. Some were taken on board by the Tory government. Some still stand to be taken on board. A good example would be that all taxi drivers should be able to speak English. By the way, I remember when Mohammed Haq made that point, he said when he first came to Britain, he couldn't, by the way, but learned to speak English because he's a migrant himself to Britain. And there should be things like recording devices in taxis and cameras so they don't become hiding places. Those are some of the recommendations. There are a whole series of them.
Claire Hanna, from the SDLP's perspective and from your own personal perspective, of course, is this a matter that the government should be taking on with a national inquiry, or, as Jeff in Woking asks, should this be left to the police to investigate instead?
Well, look, at the core of it has to be about some semblance of justice for the girls, the women now who had been abused, and prevention to make sure that more vulnerable people aren't sucked into this. So whatever lessons can possibly be learned are probably best through a public inquiry. The data that I'm seeing in the report is that there absolutely was an ethnic dimension in the locality, but I think the Casey report says that nationally there isn't. So we can't ignore or cover up the ethnic dimension there, but neither can we ignore or cover up that there are people who are using this for explicitly racist purposes. You'll be aware of 3 days of riots in Northern Ireland last week, including in Ballymena, ostensibly due to a concern about violence against women and girls. People who don't have a great heritage or hinterland on campaigning on this issue. We know that this exploded back into UK politics because of some tweets from Elon Musk, who was one day talking about protecting women and girls in the UK, and the next entertaining people like Andrew Tate and Conor McGregor. So there are people who are using this for nakedly racist reasons as well. So there's absolutely no sense in which the data and any pattern should be covered up. But we also shouldn't pretend that there aren't people who are probably pretending at their concern about the protection of vulnerable women and girls. We know this is an epidemic. Certainly the area, Northern Ireland, where I represent, is one of the most dangerous places in Europe to be a woman. We have a crisis level focus, but there are people who only dip into this issue when they think they can score some racist points over it.
Kirsty Buchanan?
One of the many benefits of working in government is you get to work with some incredibly talented people, and it was my great privilege to work with Louise Casey, who is a woman who I think we can all agree deals with all public policy issues without fear or favour. And that's what we've seen. And this is a huge tribute to the work that her and her team have done. And one of the reasons that Louise Casey changed her view throughout the course of this review, she went into it thinking that there wasn't a need for a national inquiry. One of the main reasons she changed her view is precisely the issue of data. Flawed data, inconsistent recording of crimes was allowing people to hide behind flawed data and say, nothing to see here. That combined with the obvious thing that we've all talked about, people being frightened of being called racist, those two kind of things created a perfect storm. And one of the other things that the review will have to look at is the level of complicity that sits underneath all of that, where people did know locally and did nothing. And one of the reasons that it shouldn't be left to the police is because in some cases, potentially the police themselves might very well be involved in actively covering this up. So I think there's two issues there with the police. One, this kind of, we've got to get back to a situation where we can have a conversation about difficult issues like this without people trying to shut down debate by bandying words around like racist. And when Sir John called for a national inquiry at the start of the year, Labour's reaction, the Prime Minister's reaction, was to accuse politicians who were calling for a national inquiry as jumping on the bandwagon of the far right. That sort of attitude has pervaded for too long in this country. It allows a surge of populist right who have none of the solutions to complex issues like this and causes great damage to our ability to debate this issue in a meaningful way. And ultimately, successive governments have let down these girls.
It's worth saying that, you know, people on the left side of politics were also raising this issue, Sarah Champion, Anne Cryer, and Baroness Casey talks about actually cross-party failure to properly address it and mistakes made on all sides and the importance of not politicising this. And she spoke yesterday, she chastised the opposition for perhaps politicising this too quickly. And I hope that that message will be heard. It is incredibly important that people with good intentions are ready to confront difficult realities and problems, because otherwise, precisely as Claire outlined, those that seek to divide us, those that want to cause a run amok, will do so and do so with aplomb. So, you know, it is absolutely necessary that this is now confronted. I would just add something else, as you just articulated. The listener asked about the police. The police were part of the problem. They were one of the institutions that were failing these girls, often treating them, you know, with rank misogyny, and turning, you know, victims, treating them like they were perpetrators. How on earth could you trust the police to be able to get to the bottom of this problem?
Was it a mistake? You say that you have consistently been supporting this national inquiry. Was it a mistake for the Prime Minister to indicate that those people who were calling for the national inquiry earlier in the year were basically embracing a pet project of the far right?
What I said was that I think a national inquiry had to be on the table, especially when so many people had lost trust in very important British institutions. And I think there is a wider question here about cover-ups in British institutions, the Post Office, NHS Trust and maternity scandals. And I think this is part of a wider trend. On the Prime Minister, I mean, look, credit where credit's due. He commissioned Louise Casey to look into this. It happened quickly. We now have a national inquiry, potentially with statutory powers. So, you know, I think they've got there in the end.
But he also did say that the demands for a national inquiry were a pet project of the far right.
Look, it's really important, and he's been clear, and I hope the opposition will be clear as well, that this mustn't get mired in sort of party political point scoring. You know, it is time now for change, and it's time for action to take place.
I feel but was it a mistake?
I've said already that I think he did the right thing in asking Louise Casey to look into this.
So he got there in the end quickly. Eventually. Yeah. After maybe committing a mistake earlier. Kirsty, I just want to push you also. You know, you were an advisor to Theresa May. Some of this regret must be on Theresa May.
Yeah, don't misunderstand me. Successive governments have let down hundreds of girls involved in this, and I think that I am not alone in finding Kemi Badenoch's slightly triumphant tone this morning a little bit tone deaf and a bit jarring. I think right now there is a need for humility across both sides of the House. I think it is, frankly, outrageous for the Labour Party to be accusing anybody of scoring political points when that's exactly what the Prime Minister was doing at the start of the year. It's exactly what Louise Powell was doing when she accused a Reform commentator of playing dog whistle when he raised the issue of grooming gangs. You know, it happens time and time again that those on the progressive left try and shut down debate about contested and difficult issues. And what that actually does is fuel the far right, fuel populist right in this country, and people looking for easy solutions to very complicated problems. But yes, I completely agree with you. There is, this has been going on for 2 decades. The Alexis J report came out 3 years ago. There were some moves to adopt some of the recommendations within it, but was it embraced with the vigour and the political will that it should have been? No, it was not.
Clearly not. OK, more of your questions to come for our excellent panel tonight. Praful Nargund, the Labour councillor from Islington and director of the Good Growth Foundation think tank. Sir John Hayes, the Conservative Member of Parliament for South Holland and the Deepings. Claire Hanna, the leader of the SDLP and Member of Parliament for Belfast South and Mid Down. And Kirsty Buchanan, the political commentator and political advisor, former political advisor to former Prime Minister Theresa May. You can get your questions in at 0345 6060 973, or you can text them to 84850. The time here on LBC, 29 minutes to 9. And the news headlines come from James Kitchen.
Donald Trump says the US knows where Iran's supreme leader is, but won't kill him for now. The president's meeting his national security advisors as the conflict between Israel and Iran ramps up, with explosions heard in both countries. MPs here have voted to decriminalise abortion in England and Wales by a majority of 242. It means no woman will be prosecuted for ending their own pregnancy at any stage. And a man who murdered 2 women in Milton Keynes on Christmas Day is to spend at least the next 39 years behind bars. Chaswell Brown also tried to kill his 18-year-old son. LBC weather largely dry and clear tonight. A few showers for northwestern Scotland and the Northern Isles, a low of 4 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC. Text 84850.
And it's Simon Marks in for Ian Dale and chairing Cross Question again tonight. And our next question comes from Mark in Chichester, who says, have dad's rights been totally forgotten now when we talk about abortion laws? And of course, Mark in Chichester is, I think, reacting to the vote tonight in the House of Commons by an overwhelming majority, 379 to 137, to decriminalise some of the current restrictions on abortions. But the specific question, Sir John Hayes, that Mark is asking there is, have dad's rights been totally forgotten now when we talk about abortion laws?
Well, I will talk about that because it's important. You know, you sometimes hear, even in the House of Commons, people say, well, you know, as a woman, I can speak about this, implying as a man you can't. You sometimes hear male MPs saying, well, in fact, there's one today, said, you know, well, maybe as a man, you know, I shouldn't be or can't contribute to this debate. It's nonsense. Babies are made by men and women. We know the biology. And so dads are important. I'm a dad. I'm a now grandfather. I've got a little 4-year-old grandson. And I take my parental responsibilities just as deeply, I hope, as my wife does. So I do care about dads and dads' rights and dads' roles. But tonight was a really sad night. A really sad night for Parliament of the country. So essentially what we said is that a law passed in 1967, the Abortion Act, whether you agree with that law or not, breaking that law is no longer unlawful. How can a law be meaningful if you can break it with impunity? I think that's a huge step that was taken as an amendment to another bill without a debate. This is the biggest change to abortion since 1967 with the least consideration or scrutiny. That's very sad.
Praful Nargund.
Well, I think it's important not to overestimate what has been passed this evening. It's already decriminalised in Northern Ireland and Scotland. There isn't any big crisis that is occurring. And so I think it's a pragmatic step where essentially this problem has been occurring in a very small number of cases where there have been deeply distressing stories where women who've maybe had miscarriages or haven't been able to calculate the number of weeks correctly have been either criminalised or pursued by the CPS in very distressing, traumatic moments. I don't think that's right. I don't think the British public at large probably thinks that is right either. And so, we know the evidence doesn't support that this is going to create some kind of crisis. So why not modernise this Victorian law and decriminalise it like it is in the rest of the UK and many other European countries, I might add.
And so, John, what do you say to that evidence that shows that a growing number of investigations have been launched, criminal investigations, over the course of the last few years, and that the proponents of this now successful effort to change the law were arguing that it was partly that rise in numbers that led them to act?
Well, the reason for the rise in numbers has been pills by post. Because you'll remember that during COVID, a scheme was introduced where people could obtain the means to have an abortion indirectly by post. So rather than going to a clinic and have a consultation with someone, which is what the architects of the 67 Act always thought would occur, by the way. I read the second reading debate on that bill today, when David Still introduced it. The assumption was it wasn't permissive that you couldn't have an abortion on request. It was on very strict conditions. Pills by post changed that, and it's led to something you said. But what today will do, by taking away the fact that someone will know that they're committing a crime if they do this, and the people who coerce or encourage them will also know this, I think will lead to more late abortions, more risk.
Has it led to that in Scotland or Northern Ireland, though?
Well,
where it actually already is the case.
In late abortions
Why should we have a two-tier system in this country?
Well, the Northern Ireland, I can only speak for the people who spoke in the debate, but the MPs that spoke from Northern Ireland, you were in the House tonight,
I didn't hear that.
The MPs that from Northern Ireland that spoke said there was more of a problem now in Northern Ireland than had been previously before pills by post. So, I don't know. I mean, I can't speak for Northern Ireland. I'm not a Northern Irish MP. You probably can.
Is this something that you think the Conservative Party should be campaigning to restore the laws that have basically been decriminalised tonight?
Well, I think abortion's always been a conscience vote. So it's one of those issues in Parliament where there's not been a party whip, and I think rightly so, because people have different views, and those views are sometimes based on faith, or they're certainly based on conscience or morals. So I wouldn't say it should be a party policy, but I do think there should be a party view about what's appropriate in terms of parliamentary process and scrutiny. And I think serious matters require proper parliamentary consideration and adequate scrutiny. And that is more of a party matter, regardless of the detail of this.
Claire Hanna, you are the leader of the SDLP. You are here from Northern Ireland, Member of Parliament for, now I've lost it, the Belfast South and Mid Down.
Changed the name very long.
What's your position on this? And coming back to Mark's question, have dads' rights been totally forgotten now when we talk about abortion laws?
Look, I suppose the focus is around the rights and experiences of women. Look, it's a uniquely sensitive issue. I don't doubt that. It's something I have reservations about myself, and I don't doubt the sincerity of people's views. I'm the very lucky mum of three and have been through the ups and the downs. But as Praful said, it is legal in Northern Ireland and Scotland and are decriminalised, and I believe a lot of other countries, including which have much lower abortion rates than the UK. My understanding that all abortion law remains in place with all of the obligations on women and on providers, and I suppose it just removes from criminal sanction people going through very difficult experiences who will need help and support, and I suppose where a criminal prosecution isn't considered to be. I mean, you take there was direction from the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists.
Forgive me, but how can the law remain in place when breaking it is not unlawful?
Well, it has remained in place. There were other amendments that I think sought to go further than that and to repeal the legislation around, and that's not what was passed.
This isn't a place. This isn't a place for the criminal law. And many other countries don't solve it in this way. And I mean, look, there are questions about dads' rights, right? You know, abortion is about female reproductive autonomy. There's never been anything that criminalises male reproductive autonomy in such a way or involved itself in the male body. And so it is really important that when an issue so sensitive as this, now, no woman considers an abortion lightly, that it is turned into a criminal matter. There are some incredibly distressing stories of women who have experienced miscarriages being pursued by the CPS when they're in deep trauma. It just isn't right. It isn't necessary, and it doesn't happen in parts of this country already.
Kirsty Buchanan.
Look, I frequently think that I'm very grateful that I'm not an MP. This is one of those days when I'm very grateful not to be an MP. It is a issue that is very complicated and complex, and frankly, I don't really think that I'm in a position to come down on it one side or another. What I do agree with Sir John is that I am deeply troubled by a piece of such seismic legislation. I think some of the impression you're giving off, Claude, is it's like a kind of tidying up exercise. This is a seismic and profound change to how our society operates and the relationship between the criminal justice system and the citizens of this country that's been done on an amendment with the minimal amount of parliamentary scrutiny. I am concerned by that. I am concerned by the fact that the Justice Secretary herself, Shabana Mahmood, thinks that this is an extreme reaction to a problem, and I am unconvinced that there aren't other ways, perhaps expanding out some of the criteria with which up to the current limit of 24 you can get an abortion legally in this country, perhaps expanding some of those criteria to look at some of those issues. It seems to be the wrong solution to a problem which is caused, as you say, by post. And I am, if this leaves us in a situation where women can have an abortion up until birth, then I have to say, well, alongside what about the rights of dads, what about the rights of unborn children who, by any other circumstance, would have had a long and hopefully fruitful and happy life? 2024 is the cut-off point at the moment. 80% of children that go into NICU at 24, 25 weeks survive. The later you get, the higher that rate goes up. So, yes, I totally agree. Of course, women don't, go into abortions lightly. And, of course, there are terrible instances of police overreach on this. I get that. Is this the solution to it, or is this too extreme and draconian a solution to a relatively, albeit very distressing, but relatively small problem? I'm not convinced.
I want to come back to Claire Hanna because we've had one question specifically for Claire from a listener who describes themselves as a former SDLP supporter in Belfast, who asks, does Claire Hanna honestly believe that the late, great John Hume, of course, of the SDLP, would have approved of this evening's legalising of the taking of unborn babies' lives right up until the moment of birth?
Well, look, as I say, I genuinely don't doubt the sincerity of people's views. The change in Northern Ireland was made in exactly the same way by an amendment to another bill, in very large part because Northern Ireland's politicians, myself included, failed to deal with the issue in any other way, failed to make moderate legislative changes, and therefore this became the only way to do it. Look, I spend a lot of my time being told by people exactly what John Hume or Pat Hume would think about the politics of today. I've spent my adult life, I've spent a lot of time with both of those people, and in my adult life reading and thinking about how they approach politics, including that you don't always, I suppose, deal with the issue in front of you just in line with how your own voters, you deal with it, I suppose, in a compassionate way. I'm not proposing how John Hume would have dealt with this issue, but I am the current leader of the SDLP, and I'm acting in line with my values and the SDLP's values of compassion.
And as Sir John was pointing out, it was a free vote tonight. So, I mean, there is latitude for politicians to vote their conscience on this issue. We've got lots more questions to come on tonight's edition of Cross Question. Not too late for you to call one in at 0345 6060 973 or text 84850. The time on Cross Question coming up to 9:15.
This is LBC.
apply.
Cross Question on LBC.
Back to the phone lines for our next question, and it comes from Shuvik in Eltham. Good evening, Shuvik.
Hello. Hi there. Thanks for taking my call. I'd like to ask the panel, I'm really pleased about Nicola Benedetti and Mining Classes shows on Classic FM. What's the panel's definition of a good British job?
What is the panel's definition of a good British job? And you're asking that question, Shuvik, because the government has pledged to give contracts to firms who create good British jobs. Kirsty Buchanan, what is a good British job?
What I do think is that politicians should be very mindful of not straying into the territory of promoting or promising British jobs for British workers. I think we will all recall the trouble that Gordon Brown got into in that. What I would like to see a good British job being increasingly is a complete realignment of how we reward and remunerate people in this country. For too long now, I think we have given a disproportionately large amount of salary to people for their cognitive skills and not enough for those in caring professions and not enough of those that have, that make things and skilled with their hands. So I think a good British job for me would be one where people in caring professions and, our skilled engineers and our skilled tradesmen get paid better for a good day's work.
Praful Nargund.
It's a very relevant question to me, running the Good Growth Foundation. Yes. It's a very similar sort of issue that we confront every day. I mean, when we were figuring out what good growth meant, we didn't just want to make it up, which is sometimes what happens in think tank world. We went and asked the public what are the things they really care about on the economy. And I think it's very relevant for answering this question because I think the zeitgeist is all about security. It's about enough money in your pocket so you can get by and actually afford luxuries and have a good life, and also having secure working conditions. When we talk to people, and we're doing this regularly with focus groups and polling alongside our policy work, time and time again, people still talk about the cost of living crisis, how that is hollowing out their existence and their ability to enjoy life. They talk about how aspiration has just been suffocated in this country. People just feel like they are struggling to get by. And that when things go well, when the economy grows, it's all someone else benefiting, not them. So I think when we're talking about good jobs, it's all about that financial security, not only in terms of wages, but in terms of protections and rights.
Claire Hanna, how would you describe a good British job?
I suppose, or Irish job, or
Irish job. Absolutely.
I suppose it's decent work where people are treated fairly and humanely and hopefully are productive and get some meaning for their work. I'm in favour of finding social value where you can in work and using kind of public spending and public procurement in a way that does, I suppose, reward decent employment and doesn't always have people's, I suppose, their income and their dignity at work and things like the environment as a side issue, that it mainstreams them in the decision that we're making. And I think that's an appropriate thing for a government to do.
So, John?
So what motivates people? What fulfills people? What builds contentment? I think a sense of place, a sense of purpose, and a sense of pride. And work is part of that. And that is a view of work, a view of the nobility of labour, actually, which was William Morris understood. I'm a great admirer of William Morris. I mean, I'm the only person in Parliament who ever talks about him now, long gone as the Fabian tradition. Because he understood that making things and doing things that are meaningful, that have value, crafts. When I was the skills minister, I built the biggest number of apprenticeships in modern history because I know that apprenticeships do exactly what I describe. They gave people a sense of purpose and place and pride. All of those things are central to our well-being, and the workplace can be part of that. So that means part-time work can be good, but home working, is that really that great for most people? They don't get any sense of community. I'm not sure that's a great thing. Zero-hours contracts, what's that all about? People want to know they've got a job that is properly rewarded, that they can rely on, they can build a life around. Automated checkouts in shops. I want to go to a shop and converse with people, build a relationship with them, not look at a machine and have someone stand in the background not engaging with me. There's a lot of things we have to deconstruct. We need to build a different economic model, an economic model built around the things I've just described, and it isn't about kind of huge corporate businesses who are careless of their customers and careless of their workers.
OK, let's move on to our next question. It comes on text from Angie in Sunderland, who asks, the government is pushing ahead with its plans to slash disability benefits tomorrow. Are they tone deaf
or just cruel? Those are your two choices, Praful Nargund. Tone deaf or just cruel?
It's a very difficult issue, and I can understand why lots of people are very worried about it. There's definitely a progressive case for reform of the welfare system. We have an economic inactivity crisis in this country. We have 1 million young people who are not in employment, education or training. It is a big problem, and the welfare bill is going up massively. So there is a case for reform. There is a wide sense amongst the public, and we've done some polling on this, that actually people feel the system is one size fits all. It doesn't give people the support and the necessary assistance if they could work to be able to get back into work. And actually, some interviews we've undertaken with people on the benefits feel that way too. The problem is, have they done enough to actually create a supportive system? There have been impact assessments that suggest that actually the reforms they're making may push hundreds of thousands into poverty. So what we want to see at the Good Growth Foundation's comprehensive approach, we want to see things like a national insurance holiday for people, for employers that take on people with long-term sick. All the evidence shows from abroad, where you have a comprehensive approach, you're most likely to succeed.
Elegant evasion, because what Angie is asking is the government tone deaf or just cruel to be pushing ahead with its plans to slash disability benefits?
Well, I don't think it's as simple as that. I think the point I am making is that there is a progressive case. There are cases where people feel that they have been trapped by the welfare system. The challenge is, if you don't have enough support to actually help someone into work, they'll end up in poverty. So you have to make sure there is a belt and braces approach. And we're pushing for a number of policies. John just mentioned apprenticeships. You've got the youth guarantee, which they've put in place. It's a good idea. But actually, how do you make sure that everyone that gets access to it is earning while they're learning, so you don't have people falling into poverty? As I mentioned to you, the national insurance holiday idea we've come up with, that gives employers an incentive, but also an on-ramp for those that might come back into work. And it adds, by the way, it would bring fiscal benefit if enough people get back into work. So I think you do need to have a comprehensive approach. It isn't acceptable to have hundreds of thousands of people falling into poverty in this country, and you've got to be campaigning to make sure that doesn't happen.
So, John, what do you make of this government plan?
I believe the fortunate have a responsibility for the less fortunate. That drives me in politics. And if you look at the people that you're describing, the disabled people that were mentioned in the question, of course, some disabled people can work and want to, and there are many people with disabilities making a really powerful contribution to
Absolutely.
So we shouldn't be too crude about this, but there are people with profound disabilities, with infirmity, with terminal illnesses, or in caring roles for someone else who deserve our support. And it's up to the privileged and wealthy to find means of supporting them, to redistribute advantage in society. However, there are probably 3 or 4 million people who don't fall into any of those categories of working age who are not working. Some have never worked, actually, because we have generational problems there. Now, those people need to be encouraged to work, they need to be skilled to work, and then they need to be made to work if they won't. Because it's absolutely wrong that welfare should be spent on them and not on those first groups I described. So yes, our welfare reform, but it has to be targeted at those people who aren't working who could, and there should be no disabled person, no genuinely needy person who is disadvantaged by these changes, and I'll fight to make sure they're not.
Claire, Hanna, you are nodding in agreement.
Well, I think
with what Sir John has said.
A lot to agree with both of the previous contribution. I am very worried about these reforms, and I know a lot of people who are as well. Of course, there are definite flaws and disincentives in the system, but I think being an MP or being a councillor, you are face to face with a lot of people, and it blows away some of the tabloid spin that you get on who's in benefits and the reason that they are claiming, because you make eye contact and see the difficult situations that people are in. And I think there are a lot of, you can't just say, right, we need to save a load of money, and I appreciate the public finances, and this is how we're going to do it, without it's putting the cart before the horse. If you don't have some of these provisions, that's an interesting idea about national insurance holiday, things like the kind of right to try, that you won't fall off benefits immediately if you try to take those steps. And it links into the last conversation we just had. In many cases, we do subsidise rubbish and rapacious employers, actually, and these might be the sorts of jobs that maybe people who are struggling with ill health can get, and their low paid and insecure jobs, when in many cases the welfare system is having to subsidise that low pay as well. So nobody is saying that change isn't necessary and change isn't possible, but I think it's cart before horse, and as I say, I think there will be a lot of people who really need that support, and frankly just turning it off doesn't solve the problem. A lot of them aren't going to be able to immediately go out and get work and are therefore inevitably going to be forced into worse poverty.
Kirsty Buchanan?
I don't think this government is tone deaf or cruel, but I do think it's misguided in the targets of its welfare cuts at the moment. We have a ballooning welfare bill. It's going to end up at something like £100 billion by the end of this Parliament. Nobody, I think, disagrees with the fact that you need to have that it is not compassionate to leave people on unemployment for years and years and generations. And the best way out of poverty is work. But what I am completely baffled by with these choices is to go for personal independence payment. It's not an in-work benefit. It doesn't incentivise him to work. My son is autistic. He's on PIP. I don't know if he'll ever be able to work, but what I do know is PIP payment isn't about his ability to work. It's to help him live independently. There are millions of people like this, and I think they need to put pause on this, start back at the beginning, and have a long and sophisticated look at how you incentivise and encourage people back into work rather than simply salami slicing at the wrong end.
OK, well, that vote is coming to plan to cut disability benefits tomorrow, and I'm sure it's something we'll be talking on the programme about again tomorrow night. I want to end tonight, as we do every evening on Cross Question, with the fun question of the night, which has come this evening from Alexandra in Ipswich, who asks, after Donald Trump literally dropped the trade deal and Sir Keir Starmer had to pick up the papers for him, that, of course, taking place in Canada yesterday at the G7 summit before Donald Trump left. When have you caused chaos at a really important moment? Praful Nargund.
Oh, God. Getting COVID just before I was about to get married. That's one. No, I have two agents of chaos at home. My two daughters, and they're 2 and 3, and they produce moments of chaos at a drop of a hat, like they did last night when we were trying to put them to bed. So they are the two that I'm always thinking.
I remember those days well. So, John.
Well, I'm sure many of the people who work for me would recount all kinds of stories that I either can't recall or don't want to about chaos and other cause. But I can remember one incident. Before I was MP, when I was a county councillor, actually, in Nottinghamshire, and I had two events to attend on the same day. And one was to talk at a sports club after dinner speech, and one was to go to a lecture on conservatism, on the history and philosophy of conservatism. I turned up at the sports club with a speech on the history and philosophy of conservatism. I took it out of my ready to go. And all the witticisms about sports and golf and all kinds of other things, and I was looking at Edmund Burke and Disraeli, and it was all in there. So on the hoof, I made up my speech about sport, and at the end of it, and this is the great irony, isn't it? So that was one of the best speeches I've ever heard from you.
Kirsty Buchanan.
My life is calm and seamless, and there's no chaos involved in it at all, she lied. But I will tell you a true story. The former Prime Minister, Theresa May, was sat at a table with a group of men, and the rest of the table were all men. Water was being handed out for this start of the meeting, and someone accidentally knocked the water on the floor, and it took a full 30 or 40 seconds of this group of men all looking at the Prime Minister on her hands and knees mopping up this water off the floor before they suddenly thought that perhaps they might want to get involved.
Absolutely. Claire.
Yeah, that tracks. Life is constantly chaos. I've small kids trying to run a party, trying to commute by aircraft. You're always just trying to put some order on it. And I do place a lot of store in showing up for people and keeping my word and trying not to force too many other people. But I've had many's a time where I've been maybe doing an interview in the back of a car or holding the door, trying to keep a squealing toddler away from me and wondering if the person on the other end is probably sitting with their feet up on a desk, relaxing with a cup of coffee. But that's the constant battle to try and stay on top of it.
So my answer to the question is that Ian Dale's producers will assure you that while I have not yet caused chaos at a really important moment tonight,
The evening is yet young. My thanks to our panel this evening. Praful Nargund, Labour councillor in Islington and director of the Good Growth Foundation think tank. Sir John Hayes, the Conservative MP for South Holland and the Deepings. Claire Hanna, the leader of the SDLP and Member of Parliament for Belfast South and Mid Down. And Kirsty Buchanan, the political commentator and former advisor to former Prime Minister Theresa May. Tomorrow on the panel, we've got the economist and writer Grace Blakely, Labour MP Luke Charters, the Conservative peer and Commonwealth trade expert Lord Jonathan Marland, and Emma Revel from the Centre for Policy Studies think tank. So another edition of Cross Question after the 8 o'clock news on LBC tomorrow night. Coming up in the next hour of the programme, we're going to talk about protest laws. Last month, the Court of Appeals struck down laws passed by Rishi Sunak and his Home Secretary Suella Braverman that limited the extent of public disruption that protesters could cause. We all remember those scenes of frustrated motorists trying to clear the streets of slow-marching Just Stop Oil protesters, other demonstrators who superglued themselves to roadways in an effort to block traffic. All of those scenes could be back after LBC revealed today that the government has backed down over trying to revive tougher laws constraining the rights of protesters. How far do you think people should be allowed to go in voicing objections to whatever cause is on their mind? Have you had your life upended by demonstrators?
On the LBC app and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. Donald Trump says America knows where Iran's supreme leader is, but won't kill him for now as tensions ramp up in Tehran's conflict with Israel. The US president is meeting his national security advisors in the White House Situation